in the ethos of pure safety, just as a background. And also I want to acknowledge, I'm really trying to do this so that I can take a little bit of load off of Wally, who's been our wing safety director for a long time and has done many briefings. And as there's not very many people who are qualified to actually become the wing safety director at this point, it's hard to replace him. And so I want to pick up a little bit of the slack. And so that in that regards, most of you know me from maybe aerospace education. I'm a director of aerospace education for the wing. But in terms
appreciated, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Wally. Thanks for coming on too. Yeah. In terms of professional safety, mine professionally is more on the maritime side. I've had professional training, both shipboard safety and ops for deployment of construction of maritime devices, as well as in the commercial industry. But I've also been highly interested in aviation and aviation safety, as well as I teach in chemical laboratories. So I take OSHA sponsored courses, which are, if you think Capt death by PowerPoint is bad, you should try OSHA. So without that further ado, I welcome you to the Pandemic Practicals Quarantine Safety Tip Hawaii Wing Safety Briefing for April. We're going to start with a little bit of history. So to paint some context for the age that we're in right now, we haven't had a pandemic for 100 years. It's a century. That means that there's 3 or 4 generations of people that have not lived through a pandemic. So our generation is the first in quite a bit of time to live through a pandemic. The last one that was definitely impactful was what's called the Spanish flu, but it's really not, doesn't have anything to do with Spain. It's just called the Spanish flu because Spain was independent in World War I and kept their reporting going, whereas the other countries suppressed the reports of death and the projection of the pandemic. So I just want to show this graph right here. This is a graph, a weekly graph of deaths per 1,000 population for parts of the United Kingdom in England. You'll see that the pandemic arrived in July and they had a death rate that was basically less than 1%, 0.5%, which would be akin to our experience with COVID-19 in certain areas, not in all areas, but in certain areas. And then it tailed off and they had actually months where in the whole of the UK, there was very few deaths due to the H1N1 virus at that time. And then all of a sudden it started to spike up really high. Now, this is a combination of factors. One, you have soldiers returning from the front who are infected. And two, the soldiers returning from the front, some of them are infected with a different strain of the H1N1 virus. So this virus mutates. Also, you'll notice that the virus we have now is termed SARS-CoV-2, right? It's actually a mutation of the original SARS virus from a couple decades ago. So the virus that we're experiencing right now actually will mutate. The West Coast virus versus the East Coast virus is 2 different things. The European strain versus the Chinese strain is 2 different things. So the virus that we're experiencing today is actually mutating. So you'll notice right here that this death rate is exceptionally high. We're talking about 3.5% per week in some communities over multiple weeks. That's why you had in some areas up to 10, 18, 20% death rates. So this curve right here is something we never ever want to see ever in a million years. And then what's interesting after this is they had a third peak, right? So during this time period, there was social controls. So let's take a look at that. I grew up in Alaska, but I was born in Spokane, Washington, so I went to a front page for the Spokesman Review in 1918. You can look at this, city acts to stop spread of influenza. So at that time, as this influenza spread across the United States, cities were the socio-political body that responded to the influenza. The states and the federal government didn't respond in the same way. It was basically city by city which laid down the controls. And most of that has to do with transportation. The travel, you didn't just hop in a car and drive through highways, because there weren't highways at that time. You didn't go down to the airport and hop on a local commuter flight or hop in a jumbo jet and go. You could get on the train and go from certain places to certain places, and it would take you a while, or you could get on a ship. And so transportation was different at this time. So the main political response was city by city. And what I found interesting in this front page in their response was that you can look over here and like, all lodges call off meetings, Scottish Rite Maintenance postpone meetings, shrines postpone meetings, you know, mining stock exchange closes. So there's a lot of things that were active at that time that we aren't actually familiar with at this point in time. So society has changed, but the way to control a pandemic was the same. You stop social interaction. You have social distancing. So let's go to Hawaii right now. So we have this historical context. One part about the historical context I'd like to emphasize as well, and not to spread fear or anything, but so in America, we have not had social disruption either on a nationwide scale for the last 100 years. In fact, it goes back to the Civil War, right? So this pandemic is of that order. It's 100 years. It's a century scale event. Social disruption is also basically a century scale event, whereas other places on the globe, in fact, many, many, many places on the globe, they've all experienced in the last 100 years social disruption via World War I and World War II, Vietnam War, Korea, different conflicts. So Hawaii's curve is pulled from the health department, has, it's actually really good. We've instituted social controls. The curve went up, and then we saw it go way back down. This is akin to that first curve that we saw in England. We have cases that go up, cases that go down. Our government and society is responding well. We understand that it's very important to control this. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of loss of life and also, a lot of economic impact. So, and we have in Hawaii surprisingly low community transmission at this point. The bad part is that our population, because of this, is not immune. We haven't had penetration of this virus into our population, so we haven't developed any kind of crowd immunity to this virus yet, which means that travel here will not happen anytime soon. You just can't introduce the virus into a non-immune population base. And that, unfortunately for Hawaii, also means that our main industry is gone, which this slide thing keeps popping up over that, but we depend on travel for our industry. So we will have social pressures. I'm not going to say unrest, because it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean the same thing like a war or the Civil War, but we will have social pressures that will be placed upon our society. So due to the main economic engine being gone. So there was a big context and things. Now I'm switched to just a simple thing, which was a bee in my bonnet and lots of information gone around, gone out that's bad. So I just want education is power. This is the second part in this briefing. Let's talk about mask facts. So it came out today that you need to wear a mask in public, in almost every public activity, even if you're going to pick up your food from takeout. So let's talk about masks real quick. And this is just the facts. I'm not going to spread my opinions or shame anybody for wearing any one of the three masks we're going to look at. It's just facts, right? These are the facts, literal facts. An N95 mask is called a respirator. It's usually used in industrial areas to prevent particulate from coming into the lungs of the user. The N95 mask protects the user from contamination. It does not protect other people from the user. So someone who is wearing this mask, and if they're asymptomatic, they are actually infecting the population around them. So that's just the facts. Surgical masks. Many people you see walking around are wearing these surgical masks. This mask is very effective at protecting people around the user from contamination. This does not allow virus droplets and virus particulate. These are two different things from exiting from the mask. It's a very effective method. It does not protect the user from exposure. Those are two different things, right? Cloth masks, which are recommended to be used right now, in which we're all going to have to wear bandanas or cloth masks or whatever when we go to the groceries or something. These do not protect the user from transmission in either direction. Virus will go through this, and virus will come through this to you. This is not protection from viral exposure. It does two different things. One, it prevents droplet-sized viral packages from coming from the user, and it prevents you from touching your nose and mouth. Now that's just facts. That's not anything else. And I'm not saying to use or not use. I wore a bandana when I went to Safeway tonight. It's a Winnie the Pooh bandana, and I wore it proudly. It's fantastic. So just, this is to keep you educated. It's not to make you go into Safeway and if someone's wearing an N95, you're like, you're spreading virus. Okay, so this is not anything like that. It's just for your own education so you know where you're at. All right, let's go into safety ethos. This is the important part of this briefing, the third part. I'm going to break this down to very simple things and apply it to two very simple or two safety situations in our current shelter-in-place activity. So I have been exposed to many acronyms with safety. And here's one I found. It's a nice safety acronym jungle of words that some of you will recognize and some of us are like, wow, every single thing on this list is some safety related thing. And so I'm going to break it down to a very simple one that I like. This is loosely based off of ODA, which is a Air Force principle for situational awareness, but it's put down into very simple terms for each of us to kind of, look at. And it's easy to remember. Safety training, you aced it. We're going to apply ACE to two CAP specific shelter-in-place safety issues, family security and mental health. I picked these two because this is an external issue, so it can get you to think about, some simple things you can do in your shelter-in-place to have, fun things, maybe make safety fun, make safety awareness something that isn't a requirement, but more of a expectation. And then I put mental health because to me right now, this is an area that is very hard to quantify and make easy to deal with. A lot of people do not like to talk about mental health issues because there's a stigma associated with that. But every single one of us and all of our CAP membership, we're all in a mental health state every single day. Whether it's, you're having a great day and it's fantastic or you're bummed out, right? Those are mental health states. That doesn't mean you have a syndrome or a disorder or something, but it is a mental health state. And prolonged exposure to different types of conditions can make your mental health state change. So we're going to look at that real quick. And this is just an example. You can extend this ACE to any kind of safety issue. First, aware. Situational awareness is the #1 starting point in virtually every safety philosophy. I'd be hard-pressed for you to go out and find me a safety philosophy that does not start with situational awareness. Situational awareness is something that you want to cultivate, you want to be able to train, especially if you're going to go into the armed forces or you're going to be a pilot or you're going to have any kind of job. You need to cultivate this. And what do I mean by that? I can show the antithesis of situational awareness is like, well, if you're going to cross the street and you're looking at your iPhone and you've got your earbuds in and you walk out and get run over by a car, you were showing zero situational awareness at that point. So that's the starkest, example to give, and it's very real. So let's break this down to two different two different areas. We're going to look at safety and apply ACE to family security and mental health. So awareness, who's in your neighborhood. I just experienced this. My middle child got a job at Pizza Hut right before the shelter in place came in. We were very thankful. It's super awesome. She's enjoying it. But sometimes she works till 8 o'clock at night. And we noticed in our neighborhood that, which is actually quite safe neighborhood, but because all of the restaurants and stores and things have closed, there aren't as many people out at night walking around on the sidewalks. And in fact, the people that are out at night walking around on the sidewalks now are not particularly the ones that I'd like to have her come into contact with. So we changed our behavior based on that situational awareness of our neighborhood. How are your neighbors? Just check on your neighbors. Or is your next door neighbor running a high fever and a dry cough? Protect yourself from your neighbor. I mean, these are situational awareness issues. Domicile checklists. Do you have one? Do you have a safety checklist for where you live? That's a good thing. It's something to be situational aware. It helps you make your awareness increase by just having this a simple checklist. And I threw sterile surfaces on there just because we all need to be kind of, increase our ability to make sure that we're not touching things that everyone else touches. It's just something that to add to your situational awareness. I'm so compulsive about this now that I use my pinky finger on my right hand to use pin pads and cash machines and the gas station, and I don't let that other pinky finger touch anything else anymore, which is kind of odd, but that's what's happening. On the mental health side, situational awareness is a little more tricky because it's both internal and external. You don't want to judge your family, so you don't want to go around looking and saying, I'm going to check your mental health. Also, we as individuals are very good at kind of masking our own, we justify our own behavior really well. So this is more just to kind of bring awareness to what you're doing. So, and by sheltering in place, a lot of people are gaming more, they're online more. Our diet and physical activity has changed, and this affects your mental health directly through chemistry. Maybe persistent mood changes. Some things happen when you aren't in social contact, or you haven't had the same kind of, engagement at work. And has that led to a kind of a different change? Something just to notice. And then obviously there's the direct fear and anxiety type thing. So this is situational awareness on a mental health scale. And just so we know, gaming disorder is actually now a World Health Organization recognized disease. So communicate. Communicate's like the first thing. Even if you take a first aid class, when you come upon a scene, you make sure situational awareness kicks in first, make sure that everything's secure, and then the first thing you do is call 911, right? So situational awareness first, and then communicate. But that's more broad because we can apply it to a lot of different situations. Family security. I run this by my head a lot of times. If you really do lose your cell phone and all your contact numbers, how are you ever going to call anybody? I mean, do you even remember your kids' phone numbers? Like, I'm not sure I do. And if you had a worst case situation, how would you make contact? What would you do? One of the things that we do in my household is all of us are amateur radio licensed operators, and we have a plethora of handheld radios lying around that can be put into use at any time. And I will say that for Hawaii and Honolulu, that the amateur radio emergency response people immediately during anything, they bring up a net. You can get on their repeater and find out information and also contact people. So that's just a good idea. But for your family, maybe talk about this, think about what you would do. It's a good idea. And then on the mental health side, a lot of us don't talk about how we feel in a open way. And I don't mean like I rant or rave because I had a bad day, or I just sit there and take it when someone rants and raves at me. That's not what this means. This means that you can kind of objectively look at yourself or your family and say, is there some stresses happening? Is there Are some people down a little bit? Can we actually just communicate about it? Also, can you share your concerns without being judgmental? Because in terms of mental health, communication in a judgmental way is always detrimental. It always leads to worse conditions. So let's move on. Oh yeah, I just wanted to bring this up. So if someone is experiencing these types of leading to disorders or really stressful mental health situations, mental health communication can be tricky. So sometimes you aren't able to really communicate the way you think, and you aren't able to get the person to respond to you the way you want, or you're not able to respond yourself the way you want. You're irritable or you're angry or something. Absolutely just ask for help. We have in Capt a fantastic way. We have a chaplain corps. It's amazing. You have friends, you have confidence, whatever. Just bring it up. That's the first thing. Just acknowledge it and bring it up. Ask for help. That's the best way to get past this stuff, because it's very hard to communicate in the midst of any one of these things. It's a tricky situation. Evaluate. This is where your knowledge comes into play. You having a greater education about these situations allows you to evaluate correctly and makes your realm safer. Family security, if you have more knowledge about hazards, more knowledge about things going on, that allows you to evaluate and make proper, choices. Mental health, that's more about, have we rationalized our habits? Have you seen warning signs? Do you have a cue to be able to say, okay, let's take a look at this situation? And then the last is decide. So that means act upon what you've seen. For family security, I would encourage everyone, if you don't have a security plan for your household, make one. Super simple. You can make super simple ones. Associated with this presentation later on in the recorded version, there'll be a checklist that's provided online that you can link through to. Add security measures to your home. If you find a window that didn't have a lock on it, hey, go down to the hardware store and buy the lock. And that came from your security plan because you checked all the entries and exits. Change some of your normal routines. If you find that your neighborhood got slightly more dangerous and you view it more dangerous, then don't go out in those times when it is more dangerous. This is where we get to apply everything that we evaluated and that we observed. And then also get training. Start training. Do training for first aid, communications, anything on your plan that you want to add to. This is where it's fun, right? First aid training can actually be fun. Communications training can be fun. All sorts of training in family security can be fun. And on the mental health side, basically this is more about deciding to communicate, highlighting your experiences, highlighting experiences of your family, and applying positive corrective measures. One of the ones I emphasize in here is just, if your teenager is gaming for more than 3 or 4 hours at a time straight, then they're on that edge. And why not take one of those hours and just play a game with them? Play Monopoly, play poker, do something fun. And last but not least, there's a ton of bad habits that impact mental health. Hey, now's a good time to break those. You're at home, you get to focus on yourself ad nauseum, start breaking some of these habits. Actual posture, you'd be surprised. Your body's chemistry and makeup and mental state actually is linked to your posture, which is an odd thing, but it's true. If you're sitting down, sit up, chin up, stand up, get your back straight, let your blood flow. If you're standing up, stand tall, breathe, let your shoulder blades come back. Another thing, which is really bad for your mental state, is going down guilt trips, whether it comes from outside or inside. Just reject them. They're useless. It doesn't lead to anything positive. Exercise. If we aren't exercising, our actual brain chemistry isn't working quite right. Exercise clears out some of the chemicals that we actually use every day, and it burns them up and makes new ones, and your brain responds to that, and you actually will have a much better disposition just by having 20 minutes of exercise every day. And then in our current day and age, social media drama is just utterly useless. It's a black hole that sucks your soul in. And if you find out that you are getting engaged in that, throw your phone out for a few days, or just delete that account, or just turn it off for a couple days and find out what your mental state is afterwards. That's the best way to test whether Instagram's got you sucked in or something. And they're wonderful tools, and it's great to stay connected. These are things that we need right now, but you have to be careful, because when it becomes something where you end up with artificial emotional responses to things that aren't real, you are going to be in a bad state. And last, we're going to talk about safety training can be fun. Here's a few ideas. Get an amateur radio license. It's kind of fun. It's not that hard to get a technician license, and then you can carry a ham radio around. Your kids can talk to you. You can talk to your kids without phone. Make simple checklists. This is one that I think is really important. Like, if your kids are going to drive your car, have them make up the car checklist. If they're going to cook, hey, have them make a kitchen checklist. These checklists, it doesn't mean that you have to use them all the time, but it does if you're like in a high risk situation. We use these in aircraft, we use these on ships, because you need to make sure that everything on the checklist is done. But just making the checklist for your car makes you aware of, hey, is the tire flat? Is the oil in it? It might not be as high risk, but it's equally important. Make a home safety reporting log. This one I thought would be pretty funny. You put it up on the wall, April 10th, mom spilled the milk all over the floor. Ha, ha, ha. And then you could have like how many days since the last safety reporting is. Just make it fun. First aid competitions. I used to be in competitive first aid when I was a ski patroller. I loved it. It's really, really fun. You can do it with your kids. You can do it amongst yourselves. There's some stuff online. Virtual safety meetings with extended family. This is super important. You can find out if your extended family, especially, our kapuna, whether they're, eating right, whether they're getting the kind of, especially in terms of mental health, are they getting the kind of activity they need? Are they reading books? Are they able to communicate? This is you able to check up even online. And then, replace some online activity with some live things, especially in your family unit. So what does this do? This is a huge CAP benefit. So this is the mainstay of this, is not about like an acronym, learning certain type of safety, but it's that if you increase your safety training and awareness, you've increased CAP's safety availability, and you've made CAP stronger. So increasing your family units effectiveness and safety has made CAP stronger as well. So both of these things are super important. Strengthening your own personal ability has an enormous benefit, and strengthening your family units safety ability by training and by just being aware of these things and doing some of these simple tasks, it actually is a huge multiplier in our organization, because it makes us all more conscious about it, and that spreads. When our cadets are conscious about safety, and when our senior members are conscious about safety, it just forces everyone else around to be more active in terms of our safety. So Hawaii Wing safety training, we've aced it. And with that, Major Giles is out.